tremendous bravo for you, Tom, for many things, but for hitting those notes at the end of the Allegro. Tell them you get both instruments that hit all the notes right on pitch and right is the key. So that was terrific, especially since I know, Tom, that was your first performance of this piece? Ever. Wow. I think that's pretty good. Jim, there was an enormous amount that I loved. I really thought that you were getting into this piece, and this is a piece that is very, well, I'm sure lots of us feel very close to it, but it's been my preoccupation since I was even in the teens. I loved it, every single idea about it. You, for me, were getting into so many beautiful things in every single movement, maybe not the scherzo. I mean, I'd like to reserve the scherzo because that's a special problem. But in every other movement, there was so much that was coming out. I have a question for you. Are you playing it any different now than you might have before you came to this institute? Have you played this piece before, obviously?
I studied it, but I never performed it. I mean, I never performed it with this many people.
Tell me just one thing. Do you think that our inquiry and way of inquiry has helped you in approaching this piece?
As a matter of fact, very much so. Very much so. I don't know how to describe it, but it's such an inward piece. Right. I think it's such an inward piece that, as in one of our one-on-one sessions, I tried not to think too much about expressing what was inside.
Inside you?
Right. I tried not to express it. I mean, not to make an effort to express it.
That's well put.
Right. And I tried to just simply, understand it and play it, and stop at that, and stop trying to project it.
In this case, it worked very well. How's everybody feeling about this? Does anybody, well, how do you feel about it?
I don't know if I'm the right one to ask. Since it's the first time I'm playing it, I was exceedingly uptight about it. So I can't really judge how it came off. I was mostly concerned with making a first performance that wasn't messy.
Messy.
On my part. On my part.
Does anybody want to ask Jen or Tom questions about the performance?
Well, I just have a general comment, which is that one of the things that I think we had all been talking about in your Bach that you played, now it seems like so long ago, was a sort of a general evening out of things. We talked about evening out of articulations and evening out of even sounds in an effort to make a beautiful sound always, losing some differences. And I thought that there were places, especially for me in the second movement, where I'm sure that you wouldn't have played it this way if you hadn't been here, because it was so great.
Yeah.
I thought, especially in the second one, some of the feelings I had about the Bach in that respect, I still feel a little bit, particularly in the first movement, that in your efforts to make a sound that was beautiful just as far as the beauty of the violin goes, you may have put that as a priority above.
Well, I still have to publicly disagree with you, because I have never made an effort to stay with a certain violin sound that I think is beautiful. Either it comes naturally because of the music or it does not, but I never have put an effort to stick with a certain violin sound.
Okay, that's fair. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. Just then I should say that the feeling that I got sometimes in the first movement, which I got in the Bach also, was that the beautiful sound that maybe does come naturally for you was maybe not best suited to what you were trying to do at the moment. But what I'm trying to say is something nice, which is in the second movement, I thought it was great.
As long as you preface it with that, you can say anything.
What?
As long as you preface it with that, you can say anything.
Now, since you go into the question, what would you like to say?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I only want to say nice things.
Go.
All right, may I proceed?
Can you proceed with nice things? Okay.
All right.
Can I proceed before one?
Anything I say now is considered
This tempo,
Everything is his tempo. No, you said you take the responsibility. Everyone. For all of you.
Wait. Does everybody here remember the time when Glenn Gould got up on the stage with the New York Philharmonic and Lenny Bernstein came up to the front of the stage and said, "It's his interpretation." And the interesting thing, it created a terrible scandal. And one day I heard it on a tape broadcasted, and it was extremely beautiful, and I tried to figure out to myself, what made it different from the traditional or accepted way of playing that concerto? The only thing I could think of was that Glenn Gould made more of counter melodies, counter thematic material, counter harmonic material, but basically it was a gorgeous performance, and I don't know why Lenny Bernstein had to say
Yes,
that. I
but
really don't.
he came out after Glenn Gould died and said that that whole thing had been totally misunderstood.
What did he explain?
I've forgotten. There is an essay that Leonard Bernstein wrote in a commemorative for Glenn Gould about that incident. And then it may be that he just,
What he
in
wrote,
death, he wanted to.
what he wrote in that essay is not at all what he said before the concert, where you can get a recording of
I think
that
he was doing what
speech.
politicians often do when they put their
Yeah,
foot in
right.
something,
Right.
and then they want to explain they didn't say that.
Right.
You know? It's-
Well, one of the big issues about that performance was, in fact, the tempo. People were scandalized at the very slow tempo that Gould took. And Gould's explanation was that he wanted to have a continuity of tempo between the first and second theme, and most people take the second theme so slowly. He decided to take the first theme slowly too.
But the irony is that Bernstein's recording from Christian Zimmerman is slightly longer in actual duration.
You're gonna say
That was exactly the same point I was making.
Actually, we shouldn't lose sight of somebody up here, two people on the stage. But the thing is, whose tempo would you repeat in the first movement?
I thought it was everything.
Oh, second one was my tempo.
Yeah, you're right. Second movement was my tempo, but the other one you say you're speaking.
Not everyone is everything possible. You say you take
Wait, before you get into a fight on stage, I have a question to ask you. When you say it's his tempo, you didn't find that it was the one you would care to explore? Or was it possible?
Oh, it was definitely possible. As a matter of fact, it is true that I have first approached this piece many years ago, but I feel totally new with this piece still. And therefore my mind is like almost a complete blank as to what possibilities there are with the piece. But just inside, I felt the first movement I felt was not moving enough for me.
Not moving enough.
Right.
Okay.
For me, I wanted to have a briskier tempo than the first movement, and probably our tempo this time was more of an accident than planned.
Well, what about, you say the second one was your tempo. Would you like the different, Tom?
No, I like the second.
What about the scherzo?
Scherzo for me was too fast.
Too fast.
It's the allegro, right? And you know, the question is whether is it allegro in 3 or is it allegro in 1. For me, it was a little bit on the fast side, but both agree we will take that tempo. And well, I don't know.
That's all right, no, this is the kind of thing we want to inquire, how you arrive at tempo. What makes you feel a certain tempo? And the last movement was pretty much what you both agreed on?
No, I think I was being cautious. I was trying to be cautious, and Chin was a little more less cautious.
Okay, so again, does anybody feel the tempo qualities that came through were not hitting the mark in some way?
Well, I mean, the one tempo that I feel is so, for me, off the mark totally is the scherzo. And to me, it's simply too slow. For me, this piece is certainly not in 3. It's in 1, the harmonic rhythm is practically falls through, is in 1.
Just in every other line.
It should have a tremendously driving quality to it, including the coda, which I didn't understand at all. I didn't understand why that coda should start slower than it ends.
Never mind.
Is there an explanation for that?
No, we thought about underlining the first couple of the sforzandi notes.
They would probably turn it into more amiable expression.
Because it's major on seven.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
but
think
it's
that's
major
really
even if you play it in tempo, isn't it?
Huh?
It's major even if you play it in tempo.
That's true, but if it's more amiable, it might not be so driven. I mean, I don't want to get involved. I'm happy if you want to tell me. That's fine. The only thing is, I think we agree, Walter and I, that Beethoven himself generally marked almost all 3/4 scherzos or movements that approach a scherzo in one. I mean, every one that he marked with the metronome. And while you may disagree with metronome marking, you can't disagree with the fact that he thought of it in one.
Okay.
And generally, well, the 159 number 2, which is retro, is 60 numbers per measure. So that's pretty fast. I think maybe my one comment about the scherzo I'd like you to try is what happens. There's a common problem facing us players, especially on the piano, but also on the violin. The piano, because you've got so many things, it sounds like a forte movement.
Right.
And really, these are pinpricks. If you would play them as suppressed excitement, and that made big crescendos, frankly, and except when they're made, I think you'd find it an absolutely hair-raising piece. I'd like for you to try it.
Let's try it.
Would you? Please. That is my main suggestion.
Now, suppose we said that's too fast, all right? In other words, one should feel the break on it.
But how do you then relate the trio? Because it's such a short scherzo. Does the trio not then sound like a huge big gear shift?
It can be a slight gear shift indeed, such a total charisma.
Yeah. But it's a danger, isn't it, if the scherzo is so fat and the trio and then the scherzo, it's
No, it shouldn't be that much of a difference.
No.
You are
That's right.
in terms of
We
gear
can try
shift.
just a little more help than that,
Yeah.
okay? Well, all right. That's, a little unsettling to try something so fast and so different. And one could modify and say, well, you have to hold a little more, you can make the trio a little faster. For those of you who are not pianists, you have to know that there is a run. The piano part is one of the hardest things for pianists to play ever written. I mean, it doesn't sound good on the outside, but it truly is.
Doesn't it need more thickness of motion, more bite, more just edge to the sound in the violin? Yeah.
On the spontaneous.
No, on the short notes, so you go bop, bop, so that you really, so they have that energy mark. You know,
Okay.
not loudness, but just that
A
bite.
little more.
That's terrific. That's nice one.
Yes, because it's teed up, pop, pop, pop. I mean, pop, you need straight short.
Yeah, it's like,
That sounds very good. I don't know how you like that tempo word.
As a
Area.
matter of fact, I like it. I actually like it a lot. Yeah.
All right, it certainly has possibility. On the same level, in the first movement, the only thing I would say, and you've been saying it for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I'll probably say it for 5 years if I'm still alive, and that's the point that I love many of the expressions. I won't get involved in beautiful sound, not beautiful sound. I thought the sound was wonderful, basically. Whenever you have the kind of Beethovenian crescendo, you didn't realize it on the instrument. If you played it, now there's a now that's just an inside crescendo. Right? But you started wherever you had a small crescendo like that, you always started as if the crescendo, the spirit of the crescendo were there, but not the growth.
And you, sorry, right at that spot,
Yeah.
you come to a top, and then you continue forward, it says soltanto piano.
Oh,
But this is a very important point. I think this is a terribly important point because it comes up time and time again. The spacing of crescendo. When the word crescendo appears, everybody seems to want to get loud right away, and then there are 3-4 measures and there's nothing left. You're on a plateau and it's all gone. Let's put in the marking right away, put in the length of the crescendo, and right away when you learn it to do very little at the beginning to save a lot for the, has to be sort of a geometric progression, not an instrument. And the same is true of all the dynamics in this piece. As far as I'm concerned, the main shortcoming of the first movement was not polarized dynamics enough. Neither are the pianos soft enough, nor the forte strong enough, nor the crescendi etched enough, and all the subitos are bent. They are all bent over, and this is a new characteristic of Beethoven's. He introduces the independent dynamic marking, the dynamic marking that is a parameter by itself.
yes, I agree with you on the subitos, and I agree with the whole fortes. But considering that Beethoven never used mezzo piano and mezzo forte until his later quartets, don't you think piano should be a little bit upgraded?
Sometimes, on the whole, however, I think that the contrast between forte and piano still has to be a really strong contrast.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, in reference to that, I need to ask a question. I felt in many cases I was barely touching the keys. Was the piano, what was the balance like?
I could have done with more piano.
Yes.
Certainly when you had the leading melodic material.
I thought so too, but some recently told me I was playing too loud. And
That probably was in a room. In other words, here, we're going to get the real, I'll tell you, this is a very interesting thing in terms of, say, string quartet and piano. In an empty hall, the string players feel that the piano is swamping them. People come into the hall, and if we have made that person keep the lid down, people come back afterward and say, I could have used more piano. The screams were louder than the piano. It was hard for us to believe this. Really, it's a funny acoustical phenomenon. And in the hall here, I think you could have had stick up the way you were playing. Really did.
no, what I would rather do, Bob, is I'd rather play off a little bit.
Right, I mean, play with more strength.
Because those thirds, which have to be articulated somewhat, are not coming up with them.
I understand. I mean, I'm all for
Feather,
it.
fingers.
You could have done. Yes, sir?
I just had a question about the opening, sort of just a character question about what, I thought that what it sounded like to me, and I'm wondering if this is what you wanted to project in the opening, was something that was very mellifluous, very flowing right from the beginning. It sounded like something that knew where it was. And I was just wondering what what then happens at measure 10 when these ongoing eighth notes do start, and if you wanted to make a difference between the smaller gestures and smaller...
No, I lost you. What part were you getting?
The very open...
No, after the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. I felt that you were very goal-oriented, you know, that the music knew where it was going and sort of the...
You feel that you should have just stayed.
Well, I was actually, I mean, that's the way I feel about it, but that's not important. I was wondering if you could tell me what you wanted.
Well, for this particular moment, we were trying to not get too static, to move it.
I see.
But I definitely think what you were saying has absolute validity, and I actually like it quite a bit.
There's something sort of shy about the opening.
Since you like to move faster afterwards, you said that, didn't you?
Yes, move faster in general, but that's
How
how I
making the release, da-da-dee-do, da-da-da-da,
Right.
and do it there. Why don't you try that and see if you can feel the flexibility that won't disturb the single tempo people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Start somewhat, asking questions without establishing, an ongoing tempo character. Explore that and let it release a little bit. These are all minute differences, of course, but then let it release so that the flow then exists afterwards, where he is.
Yeah. And the beginning, I'm going to play differently.
Okay.
Tell me if you like it at all.
Okay.
What I'm going to try to do is make a difference between one piano and piano dolce.
I'm sorry, between what?
What?
Okay.
The difference between piano and piano dolce, that's very good. Okay, good. I'll make a generalization that I'll absolutely stand by for everything I feel. If you could find in your way of playing every meaningful moment, the way you found the difference between piano dolce and piano, you would be one of the most magical players of violin playing that I know. If you could do every second the way you got that one quality. Now, that's a big order. I mean, they're all still trying to find that moment in that way. But if you could do that, I don't know how one can get you going to find in every single expression, whether it be an articulation, a forte characterization, a rhythm, an affect, an expressivo or whatever. If you could find just the right tone quality, just the right way to make that immediate, the playing would be just colossally beautiful. There would just be no word for it. I mean, you have obviously the intellectual capacity to really rethink these things and start exploring. So now, the challenge is keep exploring. Find the South Pole, find the North Pole, find all these poles and everything that's in between.
All right, and I seem to mention was saying, if I understood you correctly at the beginning, Jim, you were saying that you didn't want to impose yourself on the music. You wanted the music to allow it really to speak for itself at this stage. Is that right? I think.
No, actually, that's not what I meant. What did you? Before I had this disease that unless I really made an effort to shoot out everything that was inside of me, nobody would understand it in the hall. Right. And then I completely reversed that decision, and I said, even if I make no effort, it was an experiment. Even if I made no effort to project my thoughts, they will understand on their own. Yeah, that is what I mean. I didn't mean that I was not going to impose myself on the...
No, well, I didn't understand entirely what you meant, but I think now you have to go on now and explore some of the things that Bob has been talking about, and when Walter was talking about crescendi, gauging it so exactly, all these details, and then everything will be illuminated much more, I think.
I think following on from Bobby's point about making the piano dolce extend into the rest of the piece, I think that's one of the problems with the outer movements of this sonata is that whereas with many the earlier violin sonatas, you have various, what you could say, characters within the movement that you can latch onto. It seems to me in this first movement, the character changes are almost line by line. And if there's anything I missed in the outer movements particularly, it was really getting into those different characters where it could key subtly changes. And I mean, that opening is even there. There's a very different meaning between the opening phrase and when it continues.
I didn't exactly do it too well, but I thought the piano in the beginning should not really be a piano. Then a piano. That's what I
doesn't
thought.
matter at which point you make those decisions. It's important. Well, I shouldn't say that. It does matter, but they should follow some very inner logic and necessity in your mind in relationship to the music. And you did choose that, you see. That to me is very meaningful. I don't think you can say at any moment that one should play mindlessly, instinctively, or for the moment, all these kinds of things that people try to do, or mechanically. None of those things really work in terms of a great performance. And I think you're on the verge of it. Actually, I was going to say that in the last movement, the allegro, all the sforzandi on each one, I think that ran away too much. In other words, the very nature of the sforzandi is a resistance in itself. And while running away can be marvelous, say, like in a polo, concerto, but, or you can stop me, I should say.
No, I hope there wasn't an edge of rudeness in that comment.
That's the exasperation.
That's when you were running away from the auditorium.
But in this piece, I don't think that works. That kind of ongoing, in front of yourself, perpetual motion quality. It needs that, the time for those accents to be very, ingrained, solid, consistent. But other than that, I thought so much of even the last one was really quite beautiful. Is that different? There's one place, Tom, where you played da-dee-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-dee-da-da.
No, that was a mistake.
That was just a mistake? Well, I don't know, do you have an
No,
addition?
it's a mistake.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah,
In the last one?
yeah.
Yeah, it was.
I was playing another edition, and I think that,
Actually, a clear mistake.
no, it's a mistake from this, of course.
But I think
But,
Oh, no. That was my own error.
okay, all right.
You know, I'm curious about one thing. Chen, during the first week you had many burning questions, which we haven't heard for a long time. Does that mean they've been answered, or does it mean that they've just gone away, the questions?
Well, I have basically come here to learn the art of performing, right? And during the process, rather combination of direct and indirect and more of indirect possibilities that I have inquired, I think I have pretty much solved my own question.
Oh, good, give us the answer.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Well, I got rid of one of the diseases, thinking that I must project.
Desire to be a Jewish mother with every phrase.
The insecurity that if I do not project, they won't understand. I decide to give them total credit that they can read my mind as I play. Just left it alone. And that made me feel better because that insecurity, I took the chance that, I'm going to try that experience. And it seems to be working.
Oh, marvelous for me.
So I got rid of that. Another thing is physically. Physically, I have discovered that there are times when I get tense without realizing it, and by finding it, physically I have learned, especially after the bass note go down to the fingers, I have found that once in a while it gets stiff and I get nervous. So by consciously relaxing...
I didn't understand that.
By consciously relaxing the bass knuckles, here, right? and making sure that he stays relaxed throughout the whole performance, I can pretty much get rid of the physical problems, I think. And mentally, I have learned that whoever may be intimidating in the audience, I have learned by realizing that everybody is going to say something different about every phrase. I realized that at the end, it matters nothing but to not project, but do what I believe in with strong enough belief that it comes across as being the last word on whatever, which I have not achieved. I'm not planning anything like that. Therefore, learning to resist any kind of intimidation, whether it's out of admiration or respect, it doesn't matter. Learning to just shut out anybody who is intimidating in the audience. That was a big step.
Tracy, I really mean it. I think that's beautiful.
I just love the clarity that you come with all these things. I think it's wonderful. Yeah, it's good.
Well, it seems to be working, so I am happy that I guess I'm on the right track. But for me, the hardest thing is arriving at that belief that I know what I'm doing, and that that's the way it should be. And what you said made perfect sense. For this performance, even if I'm wrong, I'm gonna believe in whatever I'm doing for that. Even if I change at the last, the second meeting. Yeah. Is there any time to play anything over?
Could I?
If you have a moment to play over, which one would you like?
1, 3, and 4.
I was hoping you could play the second again.
Is it out of place just to bring up one more detail? Is that, no? You don't mind?
Put in the governor.
Okay.
Anything anybody says.
Okay, because you're talking about, differences between piano dolce and piano, and there was one other thing in the slow movement that I was just wondering if you would maybe want to try. This incredible theme happens only twice, I guess, but sort of everyone waits for it. It's so beautiful. I heard in both of your playings of this theme, in the opening tom and then chin later, that you were dividing it in the 8 bars 2, 2, 2, and 2. And I was just wondering, just talking about details and seeing how to explore them, if maybe, almost if you think of it grammatically, it looks like Beethoven has put a conjunction in the 4th bar at the end by making C-tom in the end of the 4th bar, slurring that, the last into the next. And I was wondering if you might want to try thinking of it 2 plus 4 plus 2.
Honestly, I thought I was doing it, if it didn't come across, that's what I intended. So I will try, I thought exactly what you said.
Okay.
And I was trying to do 2 plus 4 plus 2.
I'll tell you, I don't want to curtail that, but if you'd like to play the piece over, I think we can do it now, but not later. Yes.
He says without repeats.
Yes. Now, maybe that would help.
Okay.
I don't want to go too far over. as we can to get a breath. And then we'll have Steve play Marching of the Village.
Oh, long way.
Last runs.